to the republic for which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. First item on the agenda is the approval of minutes. There are two sets of minutes available for approval. Is there a motion?
Mayor,
Yes.
I have corrections for the June 1st minute.
Okay. Mrs. Pardee, would you go over your corrections, please?
On page 3 of 6, excuse me. Mrs. Pardee asked if the listed components were standard/universal to fix the city's current issues and not just products that Starfish uses. This was in reference to the quote for work we needed for IT, and our chair of the Tech Advisory Commission had been answering. So in response to this sentence, I asked if the components were standard or universal. Mr. Troxel responded, yes, they were standard components. So that sentence is what I would like to see added, that Mr. Troxel replied, yes, they were standard components.
Okay, very good. Mrs. Thomas, do you have that?
Yes, I have that.
And may I make another comment? Just a
Certainly.
reminder, while we're all on, because we have so many people, which is great, but it's really good virtual meeting etiquette to keep yourself muted at all times unless you're speaking. So everybody should be on mute unless you're speaking, okay? Thank you so much, and thank you, Mayor. And I'll make the motion to accept June 1st as amended.
Okay, very good. We have a motion to accept the June 1st minutes as amended by Mrs. Pardee. Is there a second?
Second, Mayor.
Second by Mrs. Weiss. Is there any further discussion on this motion? Seeing none, Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll on the motion to accept the minutes?
Mrs. Blankfeld,
Aye.
Mrs. Berry,
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee,
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss,
Aye.
Mr. Rock,
Aye.
Mr. Gould.
Okay, very good. The minutes are accepted. Is there another motion to accept minutes?
Mayor, I'll make a motion to accept the next meeting's minutes.
Motion by Mrs. Weiss to accept the minutes of the meeting, of the special meeting. I don't have that date right in front of me. Mrs. Thomas, do you have the date?
27th, May 27th.
May 27th, by Mrs. Weiss. Is there a second?
I'll second, Mayor.
Okay, very good. We have a second by Mrs. Pardee. Any discussion on the special meeting minutes of May 27th? Seeing none, Mr. Thomas, will you please call the roll on the motion to accept the minutes?
Mrs. Blankfeld,
Aye.
Mrs. Berry,
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee,
Aye.
Weiss,
Aye.
Mr. Rock,
Aye.
Mr. Gould.
Aye.
Okay, very good. The minutes are accepted. That takes us to the next item, which is the comments from the audience. Speakers are limited to 5 minutes. Total time allowed is 15 minutes per meeting unless otherwise permitted by Council Ordinance number 91-25. Is there anybody here this evening who would like to address the city? If so, would you please raise your hand so that I may call on you? When I do call on you, I would ask then that you be unmuted, that you state your name and address for the record, and then you'll have up to 5 minutes to address the city. Looks like Ms. Sachs would like to speak. We have her unmuted, please. Okay, go. Very good. You have the floor.
Well, thank you very much. My name is Sherry Sachs, and I live at 14474 Summerfield Road. My concern speaking up tonight is just in regard to perhaps some things that we in University Heights can do locally that perhaps could develop best practices to spread to other municipalities and further. It comes from a deep concern about the destructive responses in our country with regard to the extraordinarily serious issues regarding law enforcement, in particular police departments. So I've been really thinking about this and have some ideas to approach it for perhaps a more constructive way and to initiate some discussions to just address some of the issues. It's been very encouraging to me that I've had discussions with Chief Rogers and led to other discussions with Vice Mayor Weiss and yet another discussion with Councilperson Berry, who heads up the safety committee. So I just appreciate being heard, and who knows where it can go if perhaps it can help in some measure. It's basically two ideas. The first idea is based on existing models for various licensed and certified professions that for some reason that I cannot fathom does not exist in law enforcement. So specifically, I envision a federal registry which is used by the police departments who are hiring police to identify those officers who have egregiously violated the terms of their licensure. And perhaps licensure isn't the right word, but whatever credentialing they have that allows them to practice in the profession of law enforcement. So the main objective of this is by having a federal registry to halt and prevent the shuffling of those officers who are dangerous and therefore unsuited to serve in a manner that protects every member of society, not just those they deem worthy. Professions currently using registries include many of them: nursing home assistants who work in nursing homes, attorneys, dietitians, many more. Many of these professions also deal with unions, so that's part of the equation. It's not a forbidding piece. My proposal is to research this further and utilize existing models to bring this idea to the forefront. My second idea is to build upon University Heights' existing required positive police community interactions that have been implemented by Chief Rogers, I understand, since 2019, specifically working to build upon positive experiences with youth, between youth and the police. By creating, implementing, and measuring these programmatic outcomes, University Heights can put ourselves in a position to lead the way to create and share best practices with other police departments that over time, and it will take time, could foster goodwill in the community and improve the way that we're able to accept the police and have them protect us in the way that it should be. So I'd like to, in closing, just thank Chief Rogers, Councilperson Berry, Vice Mayor Weiss for taking my calls and even reaching out to me in an effort to try to strive to work together to find answers to real significant problems that are plaguing our society. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody else who would care to address the city this evening? If so, please raise your hand. I see Ms. Lawson. Could we unmute Ms. Lawson, please? Oh, now she's muted again. There we go. All right, Ms. Lawson, if you'd state your name and address for the record, and then you'll have 5 minutes.
All right, hello, my name is Tyler Lawson. I go by my Islamic name Aliyah, and my address is 3590 Cedarbrook Road. And I was just invited to the meeting, speaking to the mayor earlier, because a couple of friends of mine and myself are interested in hosting a rally in the city of University Heights in the upcoming week. We are planning for June 23rd, which is next Tuesday, with people starting to congregate at 5 and the actual march to City Hall starting at 7. I just wanted to bring the idea to you guys to let you know that this is something that we planned on doing, and I hope that we have your support. If you have any questions, just let me know. And we have a proposal that we have sent to the council ready. So that's it.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Ms. Lawson. I think I saw John Hissong raised his hand. Yes, so let's unmute him so that he may.
I'm unmuted. My name is John Hissong. I live at 2441 Fenwick Road. I have two more prosaic questions, and they're more questions than anything else. Whether council can address them in this meeting or not. Okay, I just want to raise them. First is about a rat infestation apparently on Tremor, which is right next to us. It's causing a lot of problems. I'm wondering if the city has got any response to that. The second is about the possibility of losing our back door or rubbish pickup. My mother's 93. I have a bad back. It's one of the biggest reasons we live in First Heights. And I want to know what the status of any possible change of the city's policy on that. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hissong. I'll just address that briefly. As first, I'm aware of a rat infestation, and no decision has yet been made with regard to the results of the 2020. Your comments with regard to back pickup are so noted. All right.
Mayor, can I make one comment about the rat infestation? I spoke with a resident on Fenwick who informed me that they contacted the Board of Health and they came out last, I say Tuesday or Wednesday. So the Board of Health is now familiar with the case, and that's as far as I know. So that's definitely a step in the right direction.
Okay, very good. Thank you for letting us know that, Councilman Rock. All right. Using the hand raising provision within Zoom, I see at least three other hands. One is Tim O'Callahan. Mr. O'Callahan, you may have the floor for up to 5 minutes.
Hi, Mayor. This is Bridget O'Callahan. My husband, Tim, is with me. We're on 2460 Fenwick, and I just want to piggyback on the rat issue. So the problem is that on Tremor, a group home, and it is led to these rats migrating over to our block. The Board of Health was out, and he said it's the worst case that he's seen out of East Cleveland. And we're very concerned because one neighbor caught 11 rats in 3 hours. Another neighbor had $900 worth of chewed wire damage to her car. We cannot sit out in our yard during the day because they are coming out. Broad daylight, the Board of Health said, that's how you know it's a huge problem. You know, we pay a lot of taxes in this city that we hope that the city supports us in regulating and monitoring these group homes. I'm curious as to how many group homes are in the city, who is regulating them, the citation follow-up. I understand the city cited them, but what is the follow-up plan? Because we've been residents here for 19 years and have never, ever had a rat problem. And our block is pristine, many beautiful homeowners on the block. And this is really upsetting to all of us. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Mrs. O'Callahan. Again, I am dismayed to hear about the rat infestation, and it's the first I'm aware that A, that there is one, and B, that it may be coming from a particular group home. If you would be so kind as to, Mr. Cook, let me see, if you could send us your contact information to M. Cook. He's our communications and civic engagement coordinator. M. Cook That's COOK, MCOOK at universityites.com. We can look further into it. Thank you.
Mayor,
Yeah,
if I can just add one additional thing is if the homeowner's been cited, there should be, a case that's beginning in municipal court, and I can talk with our prosecutor about that and give her the heads up as to the seriousness of the issue.
certainly. That would be great. And if, again, Mrs. O'Callahan, if you have an address for the group home, that is crucial for helping us identify. That will help expedite our looking into the matter.
I will send that. It's, do you want it now or do you want it in an email?
Either way, I mean, if you have it handy, that's fine, or you can send it to Mr. Cook.
It is 2452 Traymore.
2452 Traymore. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, very good. If you could still contact Mr. Cook, and then we'll know how to get hold of you. Mr. Hassong, you can do the same, mcook at universityheights.com, and we will make sure that we get back to you with some answers.
I know there are a number of other neighbors who have exactly the same concern. Just
Understand.
talking to people up and down the street.
Okay. All right. Very good. Very good. I see that there's somebody named Steve with a hand up on the participant list. Steve, are you interested in addressing the city? And if you are, let's unmute you so that you can speak for up to 5 minutes.
Yes, my name's Steve Campbell. I live at 3953 Lansdale Road. Good evening, and thanks for taking my talk here. I'll keep it under 5 minutes. So I have two issues, and they're both related to trash collection in the city that I wanted to bring to the attention of the mayor and the city council. Both complaints are directed at the service center director, Jeff Porconi. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing his name incorrectly. I haven't had my trash picked up in the last 4 weeks. Currently, I have about 15 bags of trash sitting adjacent to my driveway. No obstruction. Each bag weighs less than 25 pounds. My second issue is that I paid some money to the city to do a special pickup bulk collection. Paid the money, the city cashed the check. Nobody has done my special pickup yet. Some of the items that I requested to get picked up are a table, a chair, a broken mirror, and some other miscellaneous items, a mattress, some carpet. I talked to Jeff, the sales director, on the telephone last Thursday, June 11th, and he didn't really provide an explanation to me other than the carpet was not tied up correctly per ordinance. I asked him if he could pick up the rest of the garbage and leave the carpet for me to dispose of at my own expense, and he refused to do so. The only explanation he gave to me was he did not like the way I was talking to him. I asked again if he could pick up the rest of my furniture since I paid money to the city to, pick up the bulk items, including the chairs and the tables and whatnot. And he said he will not do it and will not pick up the trash bags, the regular household trash bags next to my house. So, I mean, I pay my taxes and I would like an explanation. I talked to my neighbors. I talked to other residents of the city. They have no problem getting a special pickup or regular trash. So I'd like to know why I'm being singled out and excluded since I do pay my taxes. And I would like someone from the city to contact me so we can resolve this, in a fair manner, so I don't have to take any further action.
Okay, very good. Yeah, I'm sorry to hear this. I did receive your email, Mr. Campbell, late last week, and I forwarded on to Mr. Picorni. It may have been too late in the week to get a response, and I've been in meetings all day. He may have even responded to me to elaborate on this, but if he has, I have not had an opportunity to look at it. Mr. Picorni, are you able to address this at this point? Maybe we can cut to the chase here.
No, I don't think this is the right forum to address Mr. Campbell and his method of trying to get this collection accomplished.
All right.
So I don't know why this isn't the correct forum. I mean, it's a city meeting. I pay taxes. Actually, I'd like to show you something. Oh, well, I was gonna try to show a picture of the trash next to my, in my yard, but I guess that feature is disabled for the city council. But I've left multiple messages, emails, and, you know, I'd like to know why I'm being singled out.
Is there a reason you didn't tie up your carpet after Mr. Picorni asked you to? That was my first question when I saw your email.
Yeah, I mean, currently I'm out of town. I'm on a business trip, so I'm unable to do that right now. So that's why I haven't done it. But I would like the rest of my trash picked up. And, you know, I guess I'll just leave it at that. I'd like to know why I'm being singled out and excluded.
Okay. Well, I will take it up with Mr. Picorni after the meeting or tomorrow, and we'll get back to you. I do have your email, so we should have a way of contacting you and getting to the bottom of this.
Yeah, so if I can get some information on how to file a formal complaint, I'd appreciate it. And I'm not sure what type of laws the city has in regards to discrimination claims, but I'd like to get that information as well.
Well, if you have a claim you want to bring against the city, that would be something I think you need to talk to your own lawyer about.
No, I don't need a lawyer. I would like to resolve it internally. You know, I don't want to go the legal route. I just want my garbage picked up.
Yeah, and I would just want to get to the bottom of finding out, you know, what needs to happen in order to get your trash picked up.
Absolutely.
So we will do that, and we will talk tomorrow. Very good. Thank you, Mr. Campbell. Is there anybody else who would care to address the city this evening?
Yes, I'm Kate Euler.
I'm sorry.
I live at 2448.
Oh, Kate Euler. Yes. Okay.
For almost 60 years. My question is regarding the development, the redevelopment. First of all, I want to say that I was happy with the covered parking. I thought that was a good idea. I wouldn't have a 110-degree car to go into in the summertime or 3 inches of snow in the wintertime. So
I'm sorry, could you which redevelopment? I don't know. There's
the development, the redevelopment with the new developers, the university Coet Levy developers.
Oh, University Square. Oh, okay. Thank you. Please.
University Square, the redevelopment of the University Square. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't
We have
clarify that.
several projects going on. I didn't know which one you were referring to. Thank you.
Oh dear.
Please go
Yeah. Okay. Well, I got a lot of information from the Cleveland Jewish News, and I put together several questions. The article says that the bondholders are going to reissue new bonds to satisfy the old bonds. Does this mean that they will retain the ownership interest? Will they co-own the development with KL Developers? What is the dollar amount of these reissue bonds? That's one question. Then another question is, the article says that the developer is buying the real estate, everything except Target and Macy's. And the article also says that the Port Authority is issuing the bonds. Are those the same bonds, the same ones that were issued by the bondholders to satisfy the old bonds, or are they different? Are these new bonds? And what is the amount? What is the dollar amount? And regarding the garage, I have questions about the garage. Will the garage be rebuilt? Will it be rebuilt or fixed up? Or will there just be new lights? It referred to new lights. So I'm worried about the financing of this really significantly. So I'd like, the article was good from the Cleveland Jewish News, but it did not cover all my questions.
Okay. I'm not sure that we'll be able to cover all of your questions here either. I can tell you that oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Did you want to keep going?
Well, you know what? And then there was compensation to the school. And I'm curious about that because that's a significant amount of money. How does that fall in?
Okay. Where should we begin?
I don't know.
Yes, yes. Yeah,
Mayor, do you want me to try to address a few of those issues?
yes, please, Mr. McConville, would you?
Yeah, so let me try to take your questions in order. The bondholders will not be the owners of the property. The owners of the property will be the developer. The developer will own certain parcels outright, and then the garage parcel will be owned by a limited liability company that will be owned in part by the developer, in part by Target, and in part by Macy's. The developer will be obligated to make what are called pilot payments. Those are payments in lieu of taxes to the bondholders to satisfy the debt service. The pilot payments are determined based on the value of the land and investment post construction of the project. It's a very similar structure to the initial structure that was put into place when the project was initially conceived many years ago. The garage itself, I'm sorry, let me back up. There will only be one new set of bonds issued, not multiple sets, just one set of new bonds that take out the old bonds and then exist going forward for the developer to make the pilot payments on. The garage itself will be sort of a combination of what you're describing. There will be a portion of it that is removed and the remainder of it will be refurbished. The design plans that we've seen in conceptual form to this point suggest that the garage will be opened up to some degree. There are not final plans yet developed. Those will have to go through the city's planning commission. And then finally, the compensation to the school is an amount that was negotiated with the school district in exchange for the school district to agree with the developer to waive taxes. So property taxes are waived. That allows the developer to make payments in lieu of those taxes, which then go to satisfy the debt service.
Very good.
That helps a lot in explaining. Okay, thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mrs. Euler.
Could I chime in? This is Debbie Musso.
Oh, yes, Mrs. Musso, please. You may have the floor for up to 5 minutes.
Thank you. And I tuned in a little bit late, so I was in the middle of Bridget, and I don't know how much of the rat situation she explained, but we were just eating dinner at the table, and I looked out my backyard and saw one going through my garden.
Okay.
They're that big.
Yes, would you please state your address for the record? I think I know it, but for the record.
2451 Fenwick. We are directly behind the house that is infested. And it chewed the wires on my mom's car, cost $900. I don't know if she mentioned that.
She did.
Yes. And we're still seeing them. I mean, we didn't see them for a little bit. And I think the Board of Health is due to come out again this week. I'm going to call them again tomorrow, because for me to see it tonight, when it's in daylight, that means they have plenty of food source, he said, and they're just out because they are nocturnal, I think he said, but if you start seeing them during the day, you're in trouble. There's an infestation. And I have 2 dogs and I'm concerned about that. I can't put traps up at my house. So he did bait around my house, but the problem has to be corrected. Not just getting rid of the rats, but the cause of it, because it's just going to continue. I am sure she told you they caught 11 in about a 4-hour period. My next door neighbor trapped with the trap. 11 in a 4-hour period. That same day that the Board of Health was out. So it really. I just want to reiterate it because we're pretty desperate here to get rid of these things.
Okay. No, thank you. Thank you. And again, that's something that we'll be looking into and we'll want to follow up with the Board of Health about. If you would send your contact information to mcook@universityheights.com. That's MCOOK@universityheights.com. we can provide you some follow-up information as well.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Is there anybody else who would care to address the city this evening? Sarah Gozier, let's unmute you, and you have up to 5 minutes.
Hi, I'm Sarah Gozier. I live on 2315 Miramar Boulevard. I know you and I had an email exchange a week or so back about the playgrounds and the tennis courts. Thank you for opening those. We've already been to them. I didn't know if there was any, what's the best way? Any idea if there was any way we could open the pool, or if not, like what's kind of the situation with that? Why? I mean, I see other local communities are opening it. I was just kind of curious, you know, if you would reverse your decisions or what kind of all plays into that, so we just get a better explanation. I know in our email you had said that we were still a hotspot for COVID, and I would like some more clarity on all that, please.
Very good. We're not opening the pool this year. Yeah, I mean, we are still a hotspot for COVID. There's a little bit of a difference between opening up the playgrounds and the tennis courts and allowing people to assume the risk and use those facilities, and for us to put lifeguards at risk and our own staff at risk, and the provisions that are necessary for opening pools. And the kind of way our pool has traditionally been used, and the way that we would have to operate our pool, it would simply be unsatisfactory and dissatisfying to the public. I'm confident of it, and it isn't worth the resources or effort that it would take to do it. And simply put, we're not going to do it this year. We will revisit the issue next year.
So this isn't financial, this is purely pandemic.
There are costs associated with opening the pool, but this is a safety issue first.
And can you just clarify why we're still a hotspot, or what that means? Is it Cuyahoga County? Is it University Heights? Or
It's all those things. There are. I'm going to go over this somewhat in my report, but you know, as of right now, there are 5,220 cases in Cuyahoga County, including 315 deaths in Cuyahoga County. Our zip codes 44118 and 44121 continue to be a hotspot for COVID-19 cases in the county. We have, there are several zip codes that are at that level. The County Board of Health chooses to report on the zip code level in this county with respect to the number of cases. Nobody has more cases in a zip code than our zip codes. You know, why that is so is something beyond anything I'm able to tell you, except that we do have hundreds of cases in these zip codes, and while we have opened up the pool and the tennis courts, they are at your risk, and I think the information out there with respect to what that all entails should give people pause before they decide whether or not they really want to use the equipment that we are making available.
will there be any more like Parks and Rec opportunities? I mean, will there be tennis lessons at all, or you get
There will be no tennis lessons this year. No, we are encouraging social distancing. We are encouraging only limited use of the facility. Tennis lessons are not happening this year. That's also in my report this evening. Okay, thank you. Is there anybody else who would care to address the city this evening? I mean, there are several hands up on the participants list. I think everybody there has spoken. I'm going to just click through the windows here to make sure. Oh, Ms. Rollinson, there you are. Annie Rollinson, you may have the floor. And please state your address for the record, name and address for the record.
My name is Annie Rollinson. I live at 3949 Bushnell Road here in University Heights. So we have been residents for the last 40 years, I believe. When the McDonald's was open up, we had petitions not to open McDonald's because of the traffic on street on Bushnell Road. There was an agreement when it was built that there would be no right-hand turn from McDonald's on Bushnell Road. And I believe it was on Lansdale, but I don't think we have that much problem on Lansdale because coming from the drive-through, everybody wants to get out. And in the wintertime, we don't have any problem. Well, we are not out, so we don't see. But it's the summertime, I can count like up to 20 seconds, there's at least 5 cars going in McDonald's. There's at least 5 coming out. Every other one or every one makes that right turn to come down Bushnell. So we are getting more traffic. We don't have a lot of kids, but it's still just so much traffic just from McDonald's. So I would just like to, maybe if the police would just sit there and be noticeable, because I'm sure they see the sign and they say, well, I'm just gonna turn anyway. But that was one of my concerns. And then on yesterday, I was at the walk, doing my evening walk, and I had talked to the mayor, and I was just sitting there. I was sitting on the bench, and all of us, in 1 second, there was a pit bull that attacked me. I got scars on my arms. I called the police and the paramedic, they come. I did have a tear on my arm. I didn't go to a doctor. They say that the dog does have his rabies shots and everything. But I go there almost every day, but I would just like to see more rules maybe on these vicious dogs being walked in the park. It did have a leash on, but I believe it was walked maybe with one of the kids. And he was trying to protect the kids, I guess. But if we could make an ordinance, maybe a rule that the vicious dogs don't be walking. But I think I'm gonna be okay. It wasn't, and I just have that concern that to keep the vicious dogs out of the park. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Rawlinson. I'm sorry that this happened, and I understand a police report was filed. Okay, all right, very good.
Yes, it was.
Yeah, I'll follow up with Chief Rogers on that and see where that stands later this week. I hope you're getting the care you need for your injury.
Okay.
I hope that resolves soon. Okay. Is there anybody else who would care to address the city this evening? Okay. Phil almost fooled me. I saw him start to lift his hand, and then I realized that's just Phil. I'm teasing Councilman Ertl, of course. Let the record reflect that he has joined us. All right. If there is nobody else who would be addressing the city this evening, then the next item on the agenda is reports and communications from the mayor and the taking of action. So, moment, please. Okay. Okay. All right. We all remain stunned by the killing of George Floyd by law enforcement officers in Minneapolis. Last Thursday, June 11th, as promoted by President Obama and the My Brother's Keeper Alliance, I took the mayor's pledge on behalf of the city of University Heights. In essence, I've committed to take the following actions. 1, review the city police department's use of force policies. 2, engage our communities by including a diverse range of input, experiences, and stories in our review. 3, report the findings of our review to our community and seek feedback. 4, reform our community's police use of force policies. I have discussed this with our police chief, Chief Dustin Rogers, who is understanding of the appropriateness of this review, that we need not wait for a tragic incident to occur to review our city policies and make improvements. I have discussed this also with Councilwoman Sandra Berry, who chairs City Council's Safety Committee, and who later in this meeting, during her committee report, will be going over the letter she signed together with 24 other African-American councilwomen from Northeastern Ohio. But with respect to reviewing the use of force policies and collecting public input and comment, Councilwoman Berry and I are going to work together to identify and approach stakeholders to join an ad hoc advisory council for this review and collection of public input and comment. Our goal is to spend the summer working on this and report back at the end of the summer, presumably at one of the 2 regular council meetings of September. I would also note that with the My Brother's Keeper Alliance, they asked for a report back within 90 days. So this would coincide with that. Anyone interested in serving on the advisory council or nominating someone to serve on this advisory council should contact Councilwoman Berry or me. At our last meeting, University Heights became the 30th city in Ohio to pass comprehensive non-discrimination legislation on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity in employment, public accommodations, and housing. Today, in a sweeping landmark decision, the U.S. Supreme Court upheld employment rights on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. In a 6-3 decision authored by Justice Gorsuch, the prohibition of discrimination on the basis of sex found in Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 necessarily includes a prohibition on discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity, because sex is a distinct characteristic inseparable from the concepts of sexual orientation and gender identity. This is not the first time our city has led on an issue only to have the state or federal government catch up to us shortly thereafter. And I grant there is still work to be done. But with our votes last time, we said that in University Heights, you can marry the person you love on Sunday and not get fired for it on Monday. And today, with the Bostock case, this is now the law of this country. This is a great day for freedom and a great day for America. On June 3rd, I went to the State House and testified to the Ohio House Finance Committee on Senate Bill 310. It was the 4th committee meeting the House held for the bill, after the Senate introduced and passed the legislation over the course of 2 days. I waited all day to testify, and I was the last person to provide proponent testimony before the committee moved and voted unanimously to advance Senate Bill 310 to the House floor for a full vote, which it then did the next day, albeit with 6 amendments. I will not now read my testimony from that day, but I will provide it to our Clerk of Council for the record. Suffice it to state, I went over how the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted our city, both in the resources devoted to responding to the pandemic and in the shortfall of our income tax collection as a result of the economic downturn. I expressed that we are on the front line and that the CARES Act money was sent to help those of us on the front line of the pandemic. That our city, that's every city in Ohio, but especially those cities who are especially affected by the pandemic. We will be taking up new legislation in connection with House Bill 481, which now contains the Senate Bill 310 provisions we've been waiting for. At the time of that testimony, I had the then current numbers of our income tax shortfall. For the month of May, Regional Income Tax Authority forwarded our city just $455,781, half of what we received in May 2019, being $896,563. That's a shortfall of $440,782, a negative variance of 49.16%. Today, we have the numbers for the first 12 days of June. That is up to this past Friday. The gross collections for the first 12 days of June 2020 are $163,012, compared to the first 12 days of June 2019, when we collected $395,287. The decline in 2020 collections in June over the course of those 12 days thus is $232,275, a percentage variance from last year to this year of 59% lower in June of 2020. We are still hopeful that things pick up as we approach the extended filing deadline of July 15, 2020, and as Responsible Restart Ohio continues. I'd like to take a moment to discuss the property at 2603 Ashurst. Last month, the City Council, with my support, unanimously voted to transfer this property to the City Beautiful CIC for redevelopment. It was zoned for a single-family house, or it is zoned for a single-family house. About 12 years ago, the house that was there was razed, and the real estate market, not being what it is now, was not strong for building a new house at that site at that time. Instead, an arrangement was entered with NEORSD to build a rain garden on the site in an effort to resolve a drainage issue in the neighborhood. Since the city's initial decision to transfer the property at 2603 Ashurst to the City Beautiful Community Improvement Corporation for redevelopment, many neighbors of the Rain Garden Pocket Park have raised concerns. Many have called, emailed, rallied support on social media, and ultimately many attended the City Beautiful CIC meeting that was held Thursday evening, June 11, to ask the board to find a way to save the park from redevelopment. The City Beautiful CIC heard those residents and voted unanimously on June 11th to authorize me, with the assistance of our legal counsel, Luke McConville, to approach Knez Construction in an effort to negotiate the removal of 2603 Ashurst from the development agreement with the City Beautiful CIC. I am delighted to report that the developer has agreed to our request to remove 2603 Ashurst from the development agreement. The plan to build a new home at that site is now off. With the outpouring of support to save the rain garden on Ashurst Road, I am interested in forming a committee of residents willing to volunteer and support further efforts to maintain and beautify the space. Anyone interested in contributing their time, effort, or resources is encouraged to contact us at info@universityheights.com. That's info@universityheights.com, so that we may organize a committee for this cause. Ongoing community efforts will be crucial to beautify and preserve this space for years to come. Last Wednesday, June 10th, we reopened the playgrounds. We have posted a sign at the playground advising that due to COVID-19, use of the playground is at your own risk. Also on the sign are advisories to keep a 6 feet distance from others, to use hand sanitizer before and after play, to not use the playground if you are symptomatic, have tested positive for COVID-19, or if you know that you have been recently exposed. We encourage wearing masks to cover the nose and mouth, and we've posted the phone number of the County Board of Health for any enforcement issues or concerns. Last Friday, June 12th, we reopened the tennis courts, and we posted a similar sign with the additional modifications as follows. Singles play only, no doubles play unless all are in the same household. No playing on courts without nets. We removed the net from every other court to promote social distancing. No spectators or congregating inside the courts. No standing in the doorways. I'll note that the doors are bolted open, so no one needs to touch them. And if others are waiting to play, take up to 30 minutes to complete the set you're playing. In both the instances of the playgrounds and the tennis courts, the restrooms and water fountains are still closed and will remain closed for the foreseeable future. The time spent out at either facility should not be so long, such that you cannot go home to refresh or relieve yourself. There have been several inquiries, but we will not have tennis lessons this year, and the pool itself is closed for the season, and we will not be revisiting that until next year. The closures and modified openings are a reflection of the ongoing pandemic and risk to public health of COVID-19. Even as we have open playgrounds and tennis courts, there is still a risk of illness that is not typically associated with these activities. To the extent that we have opened the playgrounds and tennis courts, we may at any time close them again as we continue to monitor the spread of COVID-19. For the record, as of today, there are 41,576 confirmed cases of COVID-19 in Ohio, including 5,220 here in Cuyahoga County. There have been 2,573 deaths due to COVID-19 in Ohio, including 315 deaths in Cuyahoga County. Our zip codes 44118 and 44121 continue to be a hotspot for COVID-19 cases in this county. Nationally, the count today is 2,181,044 cases, with 18,816 new cases just today, and total deaths of 118,247, with 389 new deaths today. Friday, this past Friday, was a difficult day. By now, with the exception of a few who were out on Friday and today here at the city, everyone who is directly affected by the furlough is now aware of the furlough. All directors, chiefs, and non-bargaining full-time employees were advised on Friday that we are instituting an 80-hour furlough or the equivalent by way of a temporary salary reduction, beginning with the new pay period and continuing over the next 10 pay periods. Well, for a total of 10 pay periods. I too am taking a salary reduction equal to 80 hours over the next 20 weeks. I thank all city employees subject to the furlough for understanding and taking it as well as they did. There have been and may well be further changes. On Friday afternoon, I addressed our employees as follows. These are tough times, probably the worst we've ever seen. What has happened here is not your fault. None of this is a reflection on you. I know how hard you work. I know how dedicated you are to the service and to this community. I could not be prouder of the people who work for this city. Our projection is a $2 million shortfall in 2020. Our tax collections in May of last year were $896,562, and May of this year, just $455,781. For the year, we are down $916,676 from last year as of the end of May. This is what we're up against. I went to Columbus last week and testified before the House Finance Committee, urging them to wait no longer to release the CARES Act money set aside for this city. It is only $370,000 for our city, earmarked for the COVID-19 expenses, but I am optimistic. We will see that, and we will see other aid from the federal government. I remain hopeful that the economy picks up and our tax collection improves. But until the money is here, we cannot count on it. I will announce on Monday, and again, this is what I told them, that we are adjusting our hours of operation while municipal buildings remain closed to the public. To help facilitate the furlough, we will close on Fridays at noon. If you are hourly, even if you are salaried, you should go home on Friday afternoons or make some similar arrangement with your supervisor in your department. We will get through this. Please do not hesitate to ask me questions throughout this process. If there is something I cannot answer, I will try to direct you to someone who can. This situation, as with all things related to the pandemic, remains fluid. I regret that we must go through this, but since we must, I am grateful that we are going through it together. So today is Monday, and yes, I am here to announce that while municipal offices remain closed to the public for the foreseeable future due to COVID-19, our hours of operation have changed. Monday through Thursday, our offices will continue to be operating and conducting the city's business from 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Beginning this Friday and every Friday through the end of October, municipal offices will be open from 8 a.m. till noon. We will be closed Friday afternoons. This includes City Hall administration, finance, building and housing, administrative assistance in police and fire, including the Fire Prevention Bureau. Generally, city employees will not be making or keeping appointments on Friday afternoons. At this time, and by necessity, the work of the police department, the fire department, and the service department will continue on generally as it has otherwise. If you call a dispatcher, if there is a safety issue or emergency, whichever of these three departments it affects or is necessary to help, they will be there. No matter the challenges, cities don't have the option of going out of business. Thank you. This concludes my report. Turn now to the agenda items. First is letter A, approval of Resolution 2020-29 honoring Rich Freed's 50 years of service to the auxiliary police. For those of you here who are not familiar, the auxiliary police has existed for about 52 years now, and is an all volunteer organization that supplements the work of the police department. And they are residents who are trained and who have taken a special interest in assisting the police department on various tasks where they are uniquely able to provide assistance, such as directing traffic or working security detail and so on. Rich Freed, incredibly, has been with the auxiliary police department for 50 years, come, we believe, this July. And he is being, we want to recognize him. Jerry Jacobson had contacted us and urged that we do that, and well, brought to our attention, of course, that Rich had been volunteering for 50 straight years on the auxiliary police, and of course we wanted to make note of that. So we have prepared, with the help of our police department, with the help of Jerry and Rachel Mullen, help round this up, a resolution, which I'm going to read now, because when you volunteer for 50 years, a minute to go over that is not too much to ask. Whereas Rich Freed joined the University Heights Police Auxiliary in 1970 and has served the community for 50 years. And whereas Rich Freed has provided security detail for visiting dignitaries such as Israeli politician and founder of the Jewish Defense League, Rabbi Meir Kahane, United States Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, and Nazi hunter Simon Wiesenthal, when each of them came to speak in University Heights. And whereas Rich Freed regularly participates in regular storm detail, traffic control for parades and races, and worked on combating school threats in University Heights. And whereas for many years, Rich Freed has organized the summer socials for the police auxiliary, including live music, and also has a long-standing reputation of being reliable and friendly. And whereas Rich Freed continues his service to the city of University Heights in his role as record and executive sergeant, a promotion he earned in November 2016, and also as a member of the Memorial Day Parade Committee. Now, therefore, be it jointly proclaimed by the mayor and resolved by the City Council of the City of University Heights, Ohio, that Section 1, we thank Rich Freed for serving 50 years as a member of the University Heights Police Auxiliary and look forward to his continued service. Section 2, it is hereby found and determined that all formal actions of this council concerning and relating to the passage of this resolution were adopted in an open meeting of this council, and that all deliberations of this council and of any of its committees that resulted in such formal action were in meetings open to the public in compliance of all legal requirements. And Section 3, that this resolution shall take effect at the earliest time allowed by law. We do have, because of how momentous this is, blanks to be signed by every member of council, as well as myself, as well as the law director and the clerk of council. In more normal times, we would pass this around the table and all sign it. We have a little bit of time to do this, where we will find a way to get wet signatures from everybody, because it's a special thing that we're recognizing, and we want to take the special effort to do that. So is there anybody who'd care to make a motion?
Mayor, I'll make that motion.
Very good. We have a motion to adopt the resolution by Mrs. Blankfeld. Is there a second?
I second the motion.
Very good. The second by Mrs. Berry. Any discussion on the motion?
My husband is an auxiliary for what, 13, 14 years now with Gates Mills. I have a great appreciation for everything they do to support the officers and to be a liaison with the community. And certainly we know that this gentleman has done the same in good stead for so many years, and I'm very proud of that. So I'm delighted to make this motion.
Very good. Very good. I've had occasion to work with Rich over the last 2.5 years, And I knew his service had been long, but I had no idea that he was coming up on 50 years of service. That's just mind blowing to me. Yeah. So wonderful thing. Thank you, Mrs. Blankfeld. Does anybody else have anything else they'd like to say at this point? Okay, very good. Then, Mrs. Thomas, will you please call the roll?
Mrs. Blankfeld,
Aye.
Mrs. Berry,
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee,
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss,
Aye.
Mr. Erdl,
Was here. Did we lose Mr. Erdl?
Erdl. I think we lost him.
Oh, seem to have lost him at this moment, but he was here. Okay.
Mr. Rock,
Aye.
Mr. Gould,
With great thanks and appreciation. Aye.
Very nice. All right. Very
Mr.
good.
I see Mr. Erdl. Mr. Erdl,
Mr. Erdl, do you vote in favor of the of resolution 2020-29 to honor Rich Freed's 50 years of service with the auxiliary police? Oh, he's connecting to audio. Let's give him a moment. Oh, very good. Okay, Phil, can you hear us now?
I'm texting him.
Okay. Mr. Erdl, are you there?
No, Wi-Fi stinks out there. What are you doing? Are you?
There he is. Mr. Erdl, can you hear us?
Hey, Susie. Suze? Yeah. I can't get audio.
Wow. Phil, we can hear you, but you can't hear us, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Can I see?
Sure. You're on camera.
No, that's okay.
You're using the mouse again.
Hmm?
You're using the mouse again.
Mute.
Would they ever be in here, go in the hole in the ceiling?
Yeah, but you'd hear him.
In that hole back there?
Yeah, but you'd hear him.
Your
call has been forwarded.
Mayor, do you want to come back for his vote?
I'm sorry, what was that,
Do
Mr.
you want to just come back for his vote because it did?
Yeah, I mean, we want everybody to sign, so it'd be best to have his vote for the record. That's why I'm waiting. We can, I suppose we can come back. Mr. McConville, what's the, or if either of you know, what is the appropriate way to pause something like this to vote?
Oh, Phil,
We
I
can
lost
come-
the whole thing.
I mean, we could sit tight for a moment, I suppose.
We can come back with a motion to
I lost the whole
reconsider
thing.
at a later point in the meeting.
Or
Or
I thought this was
alternatively,
your
he can
sound button.
sign even though he
Oh,
hasn't voted.
no.
Zoom.
Okay,
There.
okay.
I don't, where's your sound button?
All right.
It's up all the way.
I don't know why I can't hear. It's not muted.
Well,
I do not understand.
maybe we could let Phil know that he could phone in for the audio even as he
Yeah.
keeps the video on.
He's not responding to my text message.
Yes, ma'am, Helene.
All right.
Your call has been forwarded to an automated.
His phone's off.
I just hope I can rewatch this.
Hi.
Is that one of us calling him?
Not me.
Yeah.
Okay, I put I put Phil on my speakerphone, everybody. So Mayor, did you have a question about his vote?
Oh, yeah. Phil, can you hear us now?
I can.
Oh, wow. Wonderful. Well, we were just calling the vote on resolution 2020-29, which is the resolution honoring Rich Freed and his 50 years of service with the police auxiliary. And we'd sure like to have a unanimous vote on that if you would be so inclined. So if you can hear us now, Mrs. Thomas, will you finish the roll?
Mr. Ertl,
Aye.
It passes 7. Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Ertl. Thank you, Mrs. Thomas.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Councilman Gould somehow patched this all together. I don't know how this is going to last, but we'll see how it goes. Thanks.
All right, super. Okay, great. Well, then let's keep going while this is
Yeah.
All right. Next item is item B, motion to approve the Planning Commission's recommendation for the approval of application for Domus Construction Corporation regarding the demolition of a house located at 14396 Washington.
Sure. What can I tell you?
Construction of a new house. I think I saw a representative of Domus Construction on the line here. Yes, I see he's here. Also, before we would turn over to him, Mr. McConville, did you want to provide any background with respect to the Planning Commission meeting on this?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Briefly, for members of council and the public, we held a planning commission meeting last week at which the applicant's application for demolition was reviewed. The applicant is intending to demolish a residential property at 14396 Washington Boulevard and to build a newly constructed residential property on the same site. The Planning Commission voted unanimously to approve the plan. As council knows, or I'll just remind council that we have a demolition ordinance that indicates that the approval of a development plan by Planning Commission for a replacement structure is sufficient for approval of a demolition. And the Planning Commission conditioned its approval on the developer entering into a development agreement. During the course of the Planning Commission meeting, a couple of proposed terms of the development agreement were discussed. Those included mainly the requirement that there be a bond put in place that the city would be able to access if for some reason construction was halted, so that the city can be assured that a new residential structure will ultimately end up on the site. And with that, I would turn it over to the applicant to provide detail to council about the proposal.
Okay, very good. Let's unmute the applicant if we would, so that he may address the council.
Yes, may I?
Yes, there you are. Excellent. Will you please state your name and address for the record, and then you may proceed.
Yes, my name is Vadim Schulman, and we are located at 5325 Neyman Parkway, Unit A in Solon. So company is Domus Construction. We are building houses in the area, We did quite a few in Beechwood, and we would like to introduce our work to University Heights as well. We're proposing to build new house in the property that we're discussing here. And, we have. I'm very sorry, my dog is going nuts.
Not a Zoom meeting till a dog barks.
We do have plans ready to go. We presented them to the Jeffrey board, and with a few corrections, I believe we're very close to be approved. We're ready to go. As soon as we have the permission, we will be ready to go.
Okay, very good. Does anybody have any questions for
Mayor, I have one additional comment, which is that I had a conversation with a council member earlier relating to this approval, in which he asked whether there would be notice provided to neighboring property owners relating to the demolition and construction schedules. And I indicated that we would also take care to include provisions regarding a meeting to be held between the contractors, the owners, and the neighboring property owners, so that they can gain an understanding and expectation as to the schedule and what all will happen on the property.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. McConville. Does anybody have any questions or anything they'd care to say on this subject?
Mayor,
Yes, Mr. Gould, you have the floor.
Mayor, I had asked that question to Mr. McConville. In reviewing the meeting that you had with the Planning Commission, it didn't seem, the neighbors seemed to know that something was going to be built there and that the process was ongoing, but hadn't been notified. And I know that there's not a notice or notice requirement, but just to kind of ward off some of the issues that we've had where people might be surprised about what's happening or want to know what the process is going to be like, how disruptive it may be, and what's going to be going on next to their homes. With the lot sizes in that area, I would want to know if the house next door was getting knocked down and how long I'd be inconvenienced by that. So I just thought it would be helpful if at some point we just let those neighbors know what the process is going to be like, what the dust situation is going to be like, and how their properties and lives may be affected by that.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. Gould. Are there any further comments, questions for the applicant, or would somebody like to make a motion?
Mayor, I just wanted to ask one question before we make that motion. This was about the bond. During the Planning Commission meeting, we wanted to ensure that once the applicant demolishes the house, that a house would be built on the site, and to put up a bond to protect that from happening. So in the event that a house was not built, we could use that bond to build the house. Can you elaborate a little more on that?
Yes, that would be part of the development agreement, that a requirement of a bond be posted so that if something were to occur where the developer did not follow through with the construction of the house following the demolition, the city could then execute against the bond and build the house itself, or build a house or similar structure itself on the property. It is not within the policy or the desires of the city generally to allow somebody to tear down a house without a plan to rebuild a house. And if a house is not built within a certain period of time, the city is within rights then to intervene and commence construction in its own right. I'm sure Mr. McConville can add to that if there's anything I left out with respect to what we would generally be going for in a development agreement of that kind.
You've really hit on the salient points conceptually. We'll negotiate the timeframes, of course, in the agreement, and the agreement will contain, details with respect to that bond and what the process will be for the city to be able to, make a claim and take possession of amounts if the need should arise.
Okay. All right, very good. Thank you. Mrs. Weiss.
Thank you, Mayor. Two questions. One, if you could just remind me, was this the house that was in disrepair?
Well, it is a house in disrepair. I have driven by it. I've taken a look. It was a cute little house at one time, but it has seen better days. I don't have a picture of that house handy, but it kind of sticks out. It's not the worst house I've ever seen as far as houses go, for being in disrepair, but it is one that is, I think it's safe to say that it's one that is that when you look at how well kept the other houses are along that stretch of Washington Boulevard, it does sort of stand out as an issue.
Well, I know that the rest of council also believes, we never want to tear down a house, but I'm extremely happy that a new house is being built, and it just adds to the kind of rejuvenation of the city. So I'm in favor of this.
Very good. Okay. Would you like to make a motion then, Mrs. Weiss?
Yeah, sure. I'll make a motion for passage.
Okay, very good.
I'll second, Mayor.
Okay, I think I heard Mr. Rock first, but very good. So Mrs. Weiss makes the motion to approve the recommendation. Mr. Rock seconds. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Mrs. Thomas, we call the roll.
Mrs. Langfeld,
Aye.
Mrs. Berry,
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee,
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss,
Aye.
Mr. Erdl,
Aye.
Mr. Rock,
Aye.
Mr. Gould.
Aye.
Good. Motion carries. We look forward to working with the applicant on the development agreement and seeing the new house on Washington Boulevard. Thank you for joining us this evening. Next item is item D. Item C. Motion to approve ordinance 2020-30, amending the authorized permanent appropriations for current and other expenditures of the city of University Heights, Ohio for the period commencing January 1, 2020 and ending December 31, 2020. This is on emergency. Mr. Kennedy, you have the floor, sir. Mr. Kennedy, you are muted.
Okay, can you hear me?
We can hear you now. Thank you.
Okay, good evening. Thank you, Mayor. This represents the changes that were agreed upon out of several Finance Committee meetings and a Committee of the Whole meeting. This is for all the reductions that are not, with the exception of anything that's not related to salary. And I included on the last page a legend to go back to tell you what each one of those reductions were. I'd ask that this get moved on emergency. We can file it with the county prior to the end of this week and make the adjustments in the accounting system. In essence, the budget then for the year will be reduced by the amount of the proposed appropriation reductions. Be happy to answer anybody's questions with specifics. The majority of these things have discussed a number of different times.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Any questions for Mr. Kennedy?
I don't have a question, but I would like to thank Mr. Kennedy for all of his hand-in-hand work with council and the administration. This is a very difficult process. None of these are decisions we would have chosen to make had this COVID situation not happened. but he has been incredibly efficient and very responsive. And I appreciated the breakout that he included in the packet for this meeting. So thank you very much, Mr. Kennedy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Blankenfeld, and thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Mrs. Weiss, it looked like you had something.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I also want to echo Councilwoman Blankfeld's comments. You know, this was a joint effort by the advisory committee, by city council, by the finance committee, and of course, by the administration. And these are very difficult decisions. This is the first revised budget out of 2 that we're going to have. And, you know, these are decisions that nobody wants to make, but these are our residents' dollars, tax dollars that are being spent, and we have to be fiscal agents, responsible fiscal agents. And I just want to thank everybody.
Very good. Thank you, Mrs. Weiss. Are there any further questions or comments? Seeing none, is there anybody who'd care to make a motion at this time? Excuse me.
I'll make a motion, Mayor.
Very good. Mrs. Blankfeld?
Yes.
Can we
Okay,
clarify that that's on emergency?
yes.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. McConville. On emergencies, you have
Very
to.
good. We've
provide-
voted to adopt on emergency by Mrs. Blankfeld. Is there a second?
Second, Mayor, on emergency.
Second by Mrs. Weiss and on emergency. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll first on the suspension of the rules?
Mrs. Blankfeld,
Aye.
Mrs. Berry,
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee,
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss,
Aye.
Mr. Erdl,
Aye.
Mr. Rock,
Aye.
Mr. Gould.
Aye.
Okay, very good. And then would you call the roll on the main motion?
Mrs. Blankfeld,
Aye.
Mrs. Berry,
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee,
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss,
Aye.
You are unmuted.
Mr. Erdl,
Aye.
You are muted.
Mr. Rock,
Aye.
Mr. Gould.
Aye.
Very good. Motion carries. Next item is item D, motion to accept the city's fixed asset policy. Mr. Kennedy, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mayor. This is just a proposed policy to clarify how the city accounts for its capital assets. Until this time, there's been a kind of a myriad of different patchwork policies that have been in place. I think this will strengthen our position with the auditor's office and also allow for us to implement a fixed asset policy that's in conjunction and coordination with the new accounting system. When the accounting system was purchased a year and a half ago, the fixed asset module was never made operational. And I'd like to go ahead and take steps after passage of this to set up the module to mirror all the particular regulations and accounting policies set forth in this particular document. I had shared that with Mrs. Weiss prior to this, and I think she agrees that it'll be a good step for the city. And it will also, if we potentially would get a citation from the auditor with anything for 2019 that occurred for fixed assets, this would be a good proactive step to show them that we're changing that particular policy and taking a step in the right direction. So be happy to answer anybody's questions if anybody has anything.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Kennedy on the fixed asset policy being proposed? All right.
What is the threshold for a fixed asset?
Mr. Kennedy, did you get that?
I did not hear that, sir.
Mrs. Berry, could you repeat your question?
What is the amount that is considered a fixed asset in the policy?
Anything that has, Ms. Berry, a unit cost of $5,000 or more will be considered for capitalization. And that'll depend on other things that compose items that in conjunction together go over that $5,000. But for the main limit the policy establishes is $5,000.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Any other questions for Mr. Kennedy? Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Okay, I'm going to take Mrs. Berry. Motion by Mrs. Berry. Mrs. Weiss, will you be the second?
Yeah, second.
Excellent. Second by Mrs. Weiss. Any discussion? Seeing none, Mrs. Thomas, we call the roll.
Mrs. Blankfeld,
Aye.
Mrs. Berry,
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee,
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss,
Aye.
Erdl,
Aye.
Mr. Rock,
Aye.
Mr. Gould.
Aye.
Okay, very good. Motion carries. Next is letter E, motion to approve the city entering into an agreement with Comp Management to administer a group experience rating program offered by the Ohio Association of Public Treasurers. Mr. Kennedy, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mayor. This is for our 2021 workers' compensation insurance program. This is a proposal to get into what's called a group rating program. The city for the past 12 to 13, 14 years has been a retrospective group rating program. Basically, the difference between the two, the retro program is a little more risky. If you have issues related to the number of claims, then the projected premium in future years can go up pretty significantly. A group premium is you pay the fee for the year, and that's all the impact would be. It is also with a group retrospective plan, you would have to pay the individual premium estimate that this year is roughly a little over $155,000. And over the course of the next 3 years, you would get rebates from the Bureau of Workers' Comp, assuming things go like they have been in the past. But again, this year there would be a significantly higher cash outlay. The group premium that we would pay this year would be $129,716. So for the purposes of both improving our situation in terms of risk and the cost to the city this year in terms of straight outlay of cash, I would recommend we go back into a group plan. It's a very good plan. Comp Management's a very good organization. And we are getting this as a byproduct of a very small fee to get in the Ohio Association of Public Treasurers. And I'd be happy to answer anybody's questions should they have some.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Kennedy on this item? All right, very good. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved, Mayor.
Very good. Motion to approve by Mrs. Pardee. Is there a second?
I'll second, Mayor.
Second by Mrs. Blankfeld. Thank you. Any discussion on the motion?
Mayor, I just want to make a statement that Comp Management is extremely reputable and very attentive. I've had many dealings with them, and it's an excellent choice.
Very good. Good to hear. Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, then Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll on the motion?
Mrs. Blankfeld,
Aye.
Mrs. Berry,
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee,
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss,
Aye.
Mr. Erdl, Mr. Erdl, Mr. Erdl,
Aye.
Mr. Rath,
Aye.
Mr. Coe.
Okay, very good. Motion carries. Next, excuse me, is item G, motion to remove ordinance 2020-25 to obtain funding from the state of Ohio pursuant to.
Mayor, can I
Yes,
interrupt? I think
please.
I think the next item is item F, is it not?
Oh, you're right. I'm sorry. I checked off two things instead of one. You're right. Thank you. Appreciate the point of order there. Okay, next item is item F, which is a motion to approve ordinance 2020-31, enacting codified ordinance section 280.04 entitled Public Hearings and Notice. This is on first reading. Mr. Gould, you were the sponsor. Would you care to speak on this at this time?
Yes, Your Honor. Your Honor, excuse me. Used to being at work. Yes, Mayor, thank you. Mayor, this ordinance builds upon the work of the CIC to be more accountable and transparent to our. As you highlighted in your statement with the rain garden, there were residents who did not receive notice in a way that was useful to them. As you are aware, and as the law director ensures, we make sure that the citizens in our city are notified of the actions of council by the publishing of agendas, by the posting of notices at call and online. But that doesn't mean that the busy residents of our city who are going about their lives actually know that a property near their home may be affected by an action of this council. So at the last CIC meeting, the law director had prepared and I presented there an amendment to the code of regulations that the CIC has. That has been tabled until our next meeting, and I understand after speaking with the vice mayor that that will be called soon so that we can untable that and make a vote on the amendment to the code of regulations at the CIC. But I wanted to have this body also codify an ordinance requiring notification, so that prior to, as you're aware, there's a multi-step process when it comes to the development of property through the CIC. The first being that this council transfers the property from the city's ownership to the CIC, and then the CIC makes good use of it. This would codify the notification requirements at the council level. Not every member of council is represented on the CIC. And I think that it's important for each member of council to hear from their constituents before making decisions on certain properties that are owned by the city. This would codify that notice requirement for properties that are within 200 feet of a subject property and require mailed notices to the owner of record 7 days prior to the meeting at which council would be voting on the subject property, or would be taking a vote which may affect the subject property. In reviewing the ordinance as prepared by Mr. McConville, if members of council will take a look at their packet and reference the first section of this ordinance, I have a concern, and I totally understand after speaking with Mr. McConville why the ordinance has this section, but I'm specifically referencing the last sentence of the ordinance, and I'm sorry, it closed on my end here, but I'm opening it up again, and basically, while we are codifying or would codify by this ordinance a notice requirement, this last section says that if we don't make the notifications we've required by this ordinance, it would not affect the failure to deliver notices as provided in this section shall not invalidate the public hearing or any transfer, conveyance, sale, or disposition of property to the University Heights City Beautiful Corporation. And I have concerns about that because we are saying and recognizing by saying that notice to our citizens is important, that we don't intend to take action without that notice being given, while in the same breath saying that if we don't follow this ordinance, it doesn't invalidate what we've just done. Now, Mr. McConville, I think, can explain in greater detail, but I believe that this wording, where we say one thing and then say that there are no consequences if we don't do that thing, exists in other portions of our code, including the zoning regulation. So I'll let him kind of expound upon the history of that and the ramifications of its, or the benefits of its inclusion, potential reasons why it may have been there and has kind of been our tradition in the past, and the ramifications of removing it. Mr. McConville?
Thank you, Mr. Gould. You've summarized that correctly. The last sentence that Mr. Gould read is a sentence that is contained in other notice provisions throughout our code, in particular in the zoning Board of Zoning Appeals notice provisions and the Planning Commission notice provisions. This would allow the city to make the argument upon a legal challenge that any action taken by one of those boards was in fact legitimate, even if notice were not provided. I'm not aware of this particular provision having been tested in court, so query whether a court would be amenable to such an argument, but it at least would provide the city with an argument to make, and that argument would be particular to our charter, which makes reference to the council being able to adopt zoning ordinances and notice provisions. And we would argue that we have home rule powers to dictate this kind of out for the city. As I indicated to Mr. Gould in our earlier conversation, I'm reluctant to be the law director that doesn't provide this possible protection to the city, it having been provided in multiple notice provisions in the past. I do think that this is the kind of provision that would be the subject of review and debate in a zoning review, a comprehensive zoning code review. So that's basically why it's included. I guess to try to play out to some degree the kind of scenario where this would arise, adjoining property owner does not get notice of a conveyance from the city to the CIC. Undoing that, would be a little burdensome and, would involve some legal cost, and then we would be back to square one. I don't think that it means that council couldn't ultimately transfer the property to the CIC. I think the worst case scenario here would be that public hearing would have to be conducted first, preceding any such conveyance.
So my view on this, and I just kind of wanted to see what my fellow members of council felt, but the view that I have on this is that if we mean this, if we really do mean that we want our citizens to be notified of this and to have the opportunity to come to us before we make these decisions, that we should hold ourselves accountable if that doesn't happen. And frankly, we're holding the administration accountable for making those notices. I think we're all here for transparency and for being forthright to our citizens. And this may be an opportunity, by departing from the tradition of having that out, of creating a system of greater accountability and accounting for the notices that we send out, who we've sent them to, when they were sent, and by what method, so that we could bring that on the record prior to an action in case that was ever challenged in the future.
Well, I don't mind saying something about this, so I'm going to jump right in here. I have no problem giving additional notice to residents about what we're doing. You know, I'm all about transparency and openness and letting people know what we're doing with regard to the CIC and with regard to development in the city. In fact, I want people to know what we're doing. I want people to see what we're doing and hopefully approve of what we're doing. But the thing that I think is that we got to keep in mind here with regard to this notice provision or any notice provision is that it's one thing to take public input and consider it with regard to what we're doing, but no resident, no property owner in the city has a veto right over what the CIC is doing. So the idea that we would create that we would create a situation where, because there was a technical violation of the notice provision, that somebody would then have that veto right by voiding a transfer or being able to bring a suit that causes a project to not proceed because of a technical issue, which, had it been followed, they wouldn't have had the right to stop the project anyway. So you know, in the instance of the rain garden, which is a very unique situation compared to the other projects the CIC has done, we even there, you know, where there was a property that had been improved at one time, there is nothing about what's occurred with the rain garden that couldn't cause us to revisit that at some other point if it were appropriate. And moreover, there was nothing that compelled the CIC to reverse its decision last time other than being persuaded by the residents. The residents could not have made us, as a CIC board, those of us who were on the board, make the change if the CIC board were not inclined to make the change. So the thing is I view the public hearing notice and strengthening the hearing notice as a way of letting the community understand better and have greater opportunity to provide us input that may be persuasive. But at no point would that input be controlling that would thus make us do or not do a particular action with regard to the CIC. And with that in mind, I would not want to create a notice provision that if there was a technical failure of delivering a notice, or even a contested issue as to whether the notice was adequate, that somehow that could be used to set aside a transfer, a sale, a conveyance, a project, and then thus derail the project. That would be a disproportionate result to outsized to what the notice provision is for in the first place. Mrs. Watson.
Here. I agree definitely in theory with everything that Councilman Gould has brought up. I think it's a difficult issue to tackle, to see the nuances. I think this is a great first step in making that language more specific. I think I would be comfortable passing this now, or I mean, it's on first reading, but with the caveat that we will hopefully be revisiting our zoning code in January. And this can actually have we could do a deeper dive and maybe see if there's something that will have less legal ramifications, you know, that the law director would be more comfortable with.
Okay.
I'd like to follow up on what Councilwoman Vice Mayor Weiss had said. I know in other communities that, you know, I work for architects, and certainly when we're building a school or there's a municipal facility going to be built, notices are sent to all residents within a certain distance from that proposed project. I agree that, you know, it's a matter of notice, it's a matter of courtesy. It is, you know, there's a public meeting held so that people can voice their support or have questions, but that it doesn't negate the intended project.
Mhm.
So I would agree that, you know, when we begin to revisit the code, our codified ordinances and zoning code, that this be a part of it. And certainly between now and then, our law directors could see what other cities' policies and best practices are with regard to the same.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Blackfeld. Mr. Gould.
Luke, I wonder if there is a way, could we structure this so that if council makes a finding at the time they take the action, that appropriate notice was given, that provision then comes into play? So that, you know, if council makes see how we do in section 2. So we in many of our actions, we find that the public meeting requirements have been met and that we've taken all actions formally and public by the wording in section 2. And that's added on to the bottom of many of our ordinances. I'm wondering if what we could do is, because I understand the fear there, and I agree with it. You don't want to be, you know, 4 months, 5 months down the road in a deal and then undo it in the middle of the deal, or try to undo it in the middle of the deal because someone says their mail was lost. So I'm wondering if we could put in there, you know, if council finds that the requirements of this section have been met at the time, they take their action, or something, some wording to that effect.
We could include,
Deliver the notice.
we could include, you know, a mandatory provision. Council shall make a finding that a notice was given, and then appropriately include that in a whereas clause in every given ordinance, which, you know, then becomes a finding that's of record in the ordinance itself, and hopefully prompts council members to ask the question prior to making their vote. That is something we could do.
Maybe we can,
the other context, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying maybe we could finesse this then before second reading.
Sure, I'm happy to revisit some language to that regard with you in between now and then. The other thing to consider, just for purposes of context, is I think because we're talking about a conveyance, in this particular notice provision, we're talking about a conveyance from the city to the CIC. This would, in my mind, be sort of the least nefarious instance of the failure to provide notice. Not that any failure is excusable, but it's less troubling, I think, on the scale, on the overall scale for this notice to be missed than it would be, for example, for a zoning notice to be missed. So, for example, where someone is going for a variance, be it an area variance or a use variance, for adjoining property owners not to be notified is troubling, and there's case law to suggest that it can be fatal. So there are a couple of outlying cases in the case law where developers have been enjoined from continuing their construction due to a failure of a zoning notice that was deemed material to the adjoining property owners. So, I mean, you know, those notice provisions obviously are, you know, have to be met. And I think that it's important to remember that once you've conveyed property from the city to the CIC, that is not removing any other notice provision that would normally be provided with respect to any project. So a developer coming in at the behest of the CIC to do work and to develop a property is still going to have to submit plans to the building department and potentially make appearances before the Planning Commission and the Board of Zoning Appeals. And you know, if they're asking for variances, and those appearances would trigger additional notice requirements to adjoining property owners.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. McConville. This is a first reading. Is there anything else anybody would care to say about it before we conclude the first reading? All right, very good. Then we will consider the first reading on ordinance 2020-31 to be had. And we will move on then to item G, which is the motion to remove ordinance 2020-25 to obtain funding from the state of Ohio pursuant to Senate Bill 310 from council's agenda. By way of background, this is something that had been heard on, oh, Mr. McConville, go ahead.
Mayor, I was just going to ask before we begin if items G and H could be added to the agenda, because I know these came out late and I think they should be added first before our discussion.
Very good. Is there a motion to add items G and H to tonight's agenda?
Mayor, I'll make a motion to add items G and H to the agenda.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Rock. We have a motion by Mr. Rock to add items G and H to the agenda. Is there a second?
I'll second, Mayor.
Thank you. Second by Mrs. Pardee. Any discussion? Seeing none, Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll?
Mrs. Blankfeld. Mrs. Berry,
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee,
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss, Mrs. Weiss,
Aye.
Mr. Erdl, Mr. Gould,
Aye.
Mr. Gould,
Aye.
Okay, very good. Items.
You can call me,
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm an aye as well.
oh, thank you, Mr. Hunt.
Very good. The ayes have it, and item G and H are added to the agenda. So we will then start with item G, which is motion to remove ordinance 2020-25 to obtain funding from the state of Ohio pursuant to Senate Bill 310 from the council's agenda. By way of background, you may recall that ordinance 2020-25 was before this council on 2 readings. We tabled it at the last council meeting because Senate Bill 310 had not, as of that time, passed. And as it turns out, that was good because the provisions in Senate Bill 310 have been since moved over into House Bill 481. So the legislation we need to pass now is through House Bill 481, which is the next item on the agenda. But to clean things up for the record, what we should do is remove that from the table and dispense with it, I suppose. So it's not just tabled in perpetuity. There may be a more artful way of putting that, Mr. McConville. Is there? Did I basically get that, or is there a better way?
You basically got that right. We're just removing that from our agenda.
Okay, very good. So and the next item will then substantially cover what that ordinance would have, but rather than redlining through a document extensively, it was just it promoted legislative economy to simply write a new ordinance rather than trying to redline and change all the words in the previous one that have been read twice, even though it substantially does the same thing in principle. So that said, is there a motion to remove ordinance 2020-25 from the council's agenda?
So moved.
Okay, motion by Mrs. Weiss. Is there a second?
Mayor, I'll second.
Okay, second by Mrs. Blankfeld. Any discussion? Seeing none, Mrs. Thomas, we call the roll.
Mrs. Blankfeld,
Aye.
Mrs. Berry,
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee,
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss,
Aye.
Mr. Erdl, Mr. Rock,
Aye.
Mr. Gould,
Aye.
Okay, very good. The motion carries and it is removed. Ordinance 2020-25 is removed from the council's agenda. We now move to item H, motion.
Mayor, if I may, before we read that item H, if I could interject for one moment.
Sure.
We learned today that at the federal level, similar action was taken between the chambers of Congress that resulted in the folding in of CARES Act provisions into another bill, and that the USC statute reference is now 801D instead of 601D. So I received an email at about 4 o'clock this afternoon from the head of the Ohio Municipal Attorneys Association recommending that the title to the ordinance and the references within the ordinance to 42 USC 601D be changed to say 42 USC 801D, formerly known as USC 42 USC 601D. So I can make those revisions to the ordinance for the version to be signed, but want to note those changes for the record prior to reading, so
Okay.
that we don't actually have to amend.
Very good. So that was 801D, like in Dawn?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. There's a reference both in the title and in a whereas clause, and then I believe also in section 1.
Yes.
Of the ordinance.
Yes. Okay. Okay, very good. Very good. Thank you, Mr. McConville. All right. Well, then I will then move, well, rather, I will read the agenda item H pursuant to what you just said as follows. Next item on the agenda is item H, motion to approve ordinance 2020-32, affirming that funds from the county coronavirus relief distribution fund will be expended only to cover costs of the city of University Heights, Ohio, consistent with the requirements of section 5001 of the CARES Act as described in 42 USC 801D, formerly known as 42 USC 601D, and any applicable regulations as is necessary pursuant to House Bill 481 before receiving said funds. This is on emergency. Now, Mr. McConville, I know you explained some of this already, but would you thus explain the purpose of this ordinance and anything you didn't already cover?
Purpose of the ordinance is to allow the city to apply for and receive funding under the CARES Act. We're anticipating receipt of $370,000 under that act. New provisions were added that would require the city to pay back any unencumbered amount of those funds on or before October 15th of 2020, and thereafter to pay back unexpended funds on or before December 28th of 2020.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. McConville. Any questions for Mr. McConville? Any comments on the proposed ordinance? Is there a motion to adopt on emergency? Looks like Mr. Gould. Mr. Gould, are you have the floor.
Mr. McConville, with the regulations as to what can be spent is this going to be coming back to council at some point after the money is received to then make encumbrances against the received amount? And will you then be explaining later on what the requirements are for that, or how will this money be spent and what oversight does this council have on that?
Well, that's a tricky question to answer because I believe that the regulations are in flux. There are limited categories of expenditures that are currently allowed under the existing regulations, but there's been a lot of discussion and rumor that the expenditures for which the items for which these amounts can be expended will be expanded greatly, so that municipalities don't end up paying back the money. What we think is going to happen is that there is going to be a regulation added that would allow municipalities to spend the money on their safety forces, including payroll. And that would obviously very quickly allow the city to spend the entire amount. As for the encumbrance question, I think I would defer to Mr. Kennedy on that if he might have something to add about that.
Yeah, I think that anything that would normally fall within the realm of coming to council for approval would do so, but carry the provision or identification as something that's being COVID related. Anything that's under that amount, I mean, we do right now code things with a project code so we can track that. There are instances where this money will be allowed to be used retroactively. The auditor of state just issued a bulletin today on usage, what things can be used to spend money on, what they will audit to. And they also have created an office to answer any questions about issues related to expenses. But as Luke said, my information, there's been a number of different discussions about future actions, which could open up what we can spend the money on. But for the time being, it's pretty tight. And anything that comes before council, we will, if it's COVID related, we will identify that to everyone so that they know that's coming along to be used against those monies.
So asked a different way, do the spending requirements and the authorities that we've given the mayor, so basically up to what, $5,000, 15, excuse me.
15, yeah.
If there are COVID related expenses that.
Yes, those would still apply. Those would still apply. Yeah.
Expenditures of greater than $15,000 would still come to council for approval. Those below $15,000 would go just through the mayor and he would approve those. And we would have no further, accounting of how they were COVID related or under which requirement or authorization of the federal act or state act that specific expense was covered by. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a correct assessment. Similar to a grant, a small grant, it'd be administered in terms of the regulations or the compliance of the grant. It wouldn't necessarily come back to council to identify what particular things did or didn't apply in terms of expenses that could be charged off. But
so from that accountability standpoint, then does that go through you? So that you are not authorizing the expenditure of money that isn't qualified by one of the specific requirements of the act?
yes, I will approve all the purchase orders, and the purchase orders carry the appropriate project code, and I'll be the one to assess to make sure that something's coded correctly. If it is eligible for COVID related reimbursement.
Wonderful. Thank you.
That it isn't on that.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Any further questions? All right, is there a motion to adopt on emergency?
So moved.
Very good. Motion to adopt on emergency by Mr. Gould. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Mrs. Berry. Any discussion on the motion? Very good. Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll first on the motion or on the suspension of the rules?
I think she's muted.
Yes, Mr. Thomas.
Mrs.
you're muted.
Langfeld,
Aye.
Mrs. Berry,
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee,
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss,
Aye.
Mr. Erdl,
Aye.
Mr. Rock, Mr. Rock,
Aye.
Mr. Gould,
Aye.
Very good. And then on the main motion.
Mrs. Blankfeld,
Aye.
Mrs. Berry,
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee,
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss,
Aye.
Mr. Erdl,
Aye.
Mr. Rock,
Aye.
Mr. Gould,
Aye.
Okay, very good. Motion carries. Next item is a motion to hold an executive session immediately following this regular meeting for the purpose of discussing personnel, legal, and/or real estate matters. I believe we should do a very brief personnel matter update in executive session. I don't know, Mr. McConville, Mrs. Drucker, are there any real estate matters you want to bring up as well? And if so, we should mention that here.
I don't have anything there.
Nothing. All right. I didn't-
Nothing on my end, Mayor.
Okay. I was pretty sure that was the case, but I wanted to make sure before we took a motion. I would ask then for a motion to hold an executive session immediately following the regular meeting for the purpose of discussing personnel issues. Is there a second? I'm sorry, I asked for a second. I don't have a motion.
Mayor, I'll make a motion to enter executive session. to
Very
proceed,
good.
Discussing
Thank
personnel.
I'll second, Mayor.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Rock. We got a motion by Mr. Rock, second by Mr. Gould. Mrs. Thomas, any discussion? No? Okay, very good. Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll on the motion?
Mrs. Blankfeld,
Aye.
Mrs. Berry,
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee,
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss,
Aye.
Mr. Erdl,
Aye.
Mr. Rock,
Aye.
Mr. Gould,
Aye.
Okay, very good. We will have that executive session at the end of the regular portion of the meeting. We now turn to reports. Mr. Kennedy, Finance, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. I sent out this afternoon a brief update. I think the mayor mentioned it in his remarks. The first 12 days of June, this month, we collected a little over $163,000. Last year, in the first 12 days, we collected $395,000. It's a difference of $232,000, which is a drop off of 59%. If you remember, when the collections in May were much lower too, I believe the mayor referenced the specific numbers in his report about that. But the collections are a month in arrears. So what was collected by Rita in May gets advanced to us in June. So from now on is when we're going to see the major impact of these shortages. So the month of June will be tough. We had 3 pay periods, not 3 pays, but 3 pay periods in May. So one was right at the end of the month, the close of the pay period. So we're going to have to make 3 pay periods worth of pension contributions in June. The way the dates fall in July, we'll have 3 actual pay days. So as I mentioned before, not only will we have issues related to expenses, but keeping an eye on the cash balances too, because the shortage of collection money from Rita is going to start impacting us in June and July. Now, the federal, state, and local extensions were made through July 15th. So we're hoping that there's going to be some catch up when July 15th hits, and particularly if the economy still keeps opening and we get a little closer to what we were in the past. As I mentioned previously, the county has extended the property tax collection date to, I believe it's August 20th. It normally was in the middle of July, so we'll be a little behind and get our final settlements from the county. But the major impact of the shortages with Rita will start appearing this month and next month. And I'll get updated reports out to everybody in the next 2 or 3 days. We still have a portfolio balance of approximately $6.7 million. I'll get the details on that report out to everybody as well. And other than that, we'll, as Mrs. Weiss indicated, we'll be preparing a second budget update, an amendment that will reflect some kind of reductions associated with any salary reductions, furloughs, that type of thing. And to remind council too, I'll be getting out a tax budget, which needs to be filed with the county by the middle of June. I'll get that out to everybody. That's just basically to certify the need to continue to assess taxes in 2021. So it's a pretty standard filing, but there will be some minor changes in the distribution of how the tax collections get applied to our funds. So we talked about a little in the finance committee meetings about moving some of the money from debt service fund, which has a little bit of a surplus, and it'll help us recoup a little money in the general fund. So that'll be coming shortly. And it's about all I have for tonight. Thank you for the approval of policy and the workers' comp proposal. And happy to answer any questions.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Kennedy? All right, Mr. Gould, you have the floor.
Mr. Kennedy, you've discussed the reduction, as has the mayor, in salaries to through furloughs. By my calculation, that's approximately a 4% reduction. For those members of council who would like to also have that reduction in solidarity with the employees of the city, and maybe the law director can join in here, are we able to reduce our salary by resolution, or is there a way that we can pay back a portion of, the 4% back to the city? I know that there's some limitation on our ability to make adjustments to our salaries prior to the next scheduled election, but I wasn't sure if the writing of that portion of the codified ordinance or charter would preclude a reduction as well.
There is some Ohio law on that. I believe council would have to take an affirmative step by ordinance to do that and make certain representations in the ordinance. And I don't have the guidance in front of me, so I'd have to take a look at that, but it can be done.
Luke, I can help you with that a little bit.
Sure.
I think it's, having done it in the past with elected officials, just simply a request filed probably with the finance department will be enough to do it. We will ask anybody elected to sign it. The only provision that relates to an Ohio general opinion is elected person has to acknowledge that they can't come back and ask for that money later on at some future date. So I think if we just get an acknowledgement, I can send something out to all the council people that notice. If you return it and say yes, I can do it that way. I'm not so sure, but I don't think, I've never done it on a group basis with a resolution.
I appreciate everybody's efforts in this regard. I know that we had all discussed this and had been all been amenable to trying to do our part. So that would be terrific. Thank you.
So if you can kind of prepare together, the two of you, and then forward to members of council a I guess, a voluntary request to reduce for the rest of the year, or from the effective date of the furlough, our salaries by the 4%. That would be fantastic.
Okay, we'll get it done.
Thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. Gould. Thank you, Mrs. Blankfeld. Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. And Barbara, we're getting a lot of, we're getting some feedback on your window, and it keeps lighting up. So if you could mute when you're not speaking, that might help us out.
Sure.
Okay, yeah, thank you. All right, very good. Next would be public service, or excuse me, no, public safety. That's police first. So, oh, I'm sorry. Next, I am way off. Next is Mr. McConville, Director of Law. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll be brief. I wanted to just let council know that the conversations that I had with general counsel for Knez were very cordial. Knez was very gracious in recognizing the need for the city to deal with the political environment that ensued relating to the rain garden. They essentially made it a lot easier for us than they needed to or could have. And they also asked me to convey to everyone in the city their continuing excitement to be working in University Heights, and that there is tremendous interest that they have been able to deal with respect to the properties that are on the list for development. Secondly, I wanted to update council in the wake of the building, excuse me, the Building and Housing Committee meeting that we held last week regarding the rental registration ordinance. I have had a conversation with General Counsel for John Carroll, Colleen Trummel. Again, another very positive conversation. She was very curious about some of the changes we're considering to the ordinance, and indicated that both she and Kate Malone would be interested in participating in the follow-up committee meeting. We talked about their schedules and some potential dates coming either in late June or early July. I had hoped to hear back from her prior to tonight's meeting, but have not, but we'll go ahead and forward the dates that they give me to Councilwoman Blankfeld as soon as I have them. And I'm cautiously optimistic that I will have a redlined draft of 1280.10 out to council this week, so that there won't be any sort of rush in reviewing proposed language and making comment to it prior to the committee meeting. And that concludes my report.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. McConville. Any questions for Mr. McConville? All right. Then we will move on. Public safety, police, Chief Rogers.
No report, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Public safety, fire, Chief Perko.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, council. ISO, the Insurance Service Office, has been working with the fire department over the course of the last 6 months, conducting an assessment. They completed that assessment of us, so we have some good news to report. This assessment is basically, if you think of it as a report card of the fire department, or the grading of our services and our municipal fire protection efforts and our preparedness. It allows insurance companies to use this to help establish appropriate insurance premiums for residents and commercial properties. This public protection classification that they refer to as the PPC is based on the fire suppression rating schedule, which is like a thorough analysis by the subject matter experts of ISO. The PPC helps the communities to prepare to fight fires effectively. And the most significant benefit of this really is to address fire loss in the community. Recognizes the efforts of the community to provide fire protection, the services for the citizens and the property owners. It addresses the community's investment in the fire mitigation, the fire department's efforts, and is been proven through data as a reliable predicator of fire loss in a community. This process, like I said, started about 6 months ago. Fire department had to compile a bunch of data that took a couple of months to get together. And then they send a field rep out and conduct a survey over the course of a day. And then they take that data along with the data we provided them and spend another couple of months compiling it all. And really it comes down to addressing 4 main categories. This is in communications, fire department operations, our water supply, and our community risk reduction efforts. And so when I talk about communications, it's on all levels, including at the dispatch center and how calls are being processed. Fire department operations is really a big breakdown. It talks about our first alarm response and our initial fire attack efforts. So what that means is they look to see if we are required to have a fire engine, which we are, and what type it is, a fire ladder, and how we deploy these resources, what equipment is on these apparatus, as well as the maintenance and the records of these. A lot of times through the years, I've been talking about trying to meet standards from the NFPA organization. They look to make sure that we're meeting these standards and keeping up with testing, whether it be annual or semi-annual. It also looks at personnel, how much staffing we have in general and how it's deployed on our apparatus. Looks at the levels of that, as well as the training of our personnel. Various certifications and how it meets standards, as well as the hours we have per year in our developmental program for training. With water, looks at overall water supply. We're finishing up flushing hydrants right now and the inspection of them. This also includes flow testing, as well as the fire hose and nozzles on the trucks. And then that last part, community risk reduction, that's really about the efforts of the Fire Prevention Bureau. Everything to do with fire prevention code adoption and our enforcement of it, public safety education, fire investigation efforts, and fire pre-incident planning for our buildings. So overall, the ISO really analyzes all this data, and then it goes to a recommendation of a public classification level. Once that level is established, it goes to our internal review board at ISO prior to issuing the classification. So last week we got our official letter of what our classification is, and it comes down in a rating from 1 to 10, with 1 being the best. And it's based on a sliding point scale that scores all those things I just mentioned. So the significance of this is that, and the objective of the evaluation is that the fire department and its operational standards are being met to national standards. It has a financial benefit to the residents and the businesses and property owners of this city based on a good score. And then I recognize the efforts and the performance of all of our employees here. It really works to prepare the community to save lives and mitigate loss. So I'm happy to announce that our score has drastically improved. On a scale of 1 to 10, we are a class 2 now. This was rated out of about 40,000 other fire departments in the country. Our points increased by 16% since our last time we were rated. As a company officer in 2010, I participated in a rating, and our classification then was a 4. This class 2 out of 40,000 fire departments puts us in the top 1,700, which is 4% in the country, and it puts us in the top 98 in the state of Ohio. This is really due to the improvements in staffing, the deployment of staffing on our apparatus, the type of apparatus we have and the condition they're in, the maintenance records, records of our training, and all of the efforts of our Fire Prevention Bureau. So it really ties into the last 3 years of hard work and the support from you, the administration, and all the efforts of our firefighters and our fire officers and everything they do every day. We've already met with our field rep to see what kind of goals we should implement to analyze our study on how we can do better the next time even. So we're focusing on our areas of weakness while we're trying to maintain continuity in the areas that we did excel in. So I do have a press release prepared for this, which I will have emailed out here by the end of the night, as well as to Mr. Pekorski if he chooses. So happy to answer any questions if anyone has any.
That's wonderful news. Thank you, Chief Perko. Does anybody have any questions for the chief with regard to this accomplishment of our department and this wonderful rating we've received? Okay. All right, very good. Well, the press release will also go into much of that, and I've seen it, and it may allow the implications of the positive implications, I should say, of the new rating should be it should be evident when you see that. And very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. All right. Next up is Service. Mr. McCorney, any report?
No report, Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Then next will be the city engineer, Mr. Chuney. Do you have a report today?
Mayor, I do not have a report. I do have a comment on one of the comments from the audience that was received this evening, the one about the McDonald's, the last comment that was made. I was present when they went through Planning Commission and the City Council, and it was a condition of that approval that there be no right-hand turns onto Bushnell Road. And I would hope that the sign is still posted there. I really don't go to McDonald's. I don't have any kids at home anymore, but I would hope that sign is still posted. It's part of their approval that they did receive. And it was debated quite heavily during that time about the increased traffic on Bushnell Road. So, and I know it's an enforcement issue now, but I would hope at least the signs are still posted.
Yes, we'll have to verify that the signs are still there. I will. I don't know if it's a matter of pride or just a matter of fact. I've not been through the McDonald's parking lot in some time either, so I'm not able to say.
I saw the signs last week.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yes, they're still there.
I could tell you that at Dunkin' they're still there. So I know that you can't just turn right onto Vernon similarly, and I don't. Even though that would be a quicker way to either my house or City Hall. So very good. Yeah, that is something that we'll want to take a closer look at. Thank you, Mr. Chuney. All right, next is letter G, communications and civic engagement. Mr. Cook, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mayor. Earlier in the meeting, you asked residents who are watching to submit emails I've already received about the rat situation. So obviously that will be a huge priority for many of us starting now. So I look forward to working with everyone to tackle this problem. And the only thing I wanted to report on is next issue of Mosaic comes out in July. It's looking very good. I want to publicly thank Caleb Schuster from the Fire Department. As you all know, Caleb has done some wonderful photography for the city in the past, and he's also doing the cover shoot for this. We did that last week at Heights High, and not to overhype it, but it's really good work, and I think it's something that we're all going to be proud of when that issue comes out. That's it.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Cook. Any questions for Mr. Cook? I have a question. How much longer do we have in the census battle that's going on between Councilwoman Blankfeld and Councilwoman Russell in Cleveland Heights?
It's, as I understand, it's going in, Councilwoman Blankfeld, please correct me if I'm wrong. It's going through the end of the month. We're winning. We're going to win. Write it down. Make room for the tree.
I believe it was August 1st is our deadline.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
That's right.
When's
So
our
I know
deadline?
there's talk about doing it just for the month, but yeah, you're absolutely right. August 1st. Deadline for the census. That makes sense for the contest.
Mr. Cook, Mr. Cook, I know that you look at this regularly. Do you know where we stand as far as participation between us and Cleveland Heights?
You know, it's on the dry erase board in my office. I'm cleaning out in my backyard now, but the last update I saw was from the 11th, and that was when I checked it this morning. So I checked it in the morning. I would assume the census would update it either early this afternoon or sometime tomorrow. But I'll report back to that. But we have a sizable lead. We've grown more since the contest has begun. I mean, everyone's doing well, and it's important for everyone. But yeah, I like where we're going on this.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you both. All right, next up is Economic Development. Mrs. Drucker, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Just a couple notes tonight. First one is Brendan Zach, who is our planner. He completed the 16.75 credit hour ODOT LPA training course. This is a course that allows the city to manage the Federal Highway Administration funds, which are the funds we use for our federal road projects. And it allows the city can manage the funds through ODOT directly, and that gives the city more control over the project timelines. Brendan is currently working to finalize the Warrensville Center Road resurfacing reimbursements with Joe Chuney and the contractors. Secondly, I have started writing the RFP for the comprehensive zoning update set for the budget year 2021. I will be presenting it at a future Economic Development Committee meeting just to get that conversation started. With the idea that we get this RFP and maybe that'll give us a better idea for the budget request prior to going into budget hearings for 2021. And then finally, we are in the process of sending out a doodle poll for a CIC meeting to follow up on those regulations. So you'll be looking, look out for that in your emails. Most likely tomorrow, the poll will go out. And those are my notes for tonight. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Mrs. Drucker. Does anybody have any questions for Mrs. Drucker? All right, seeing none, we will move on to reports from standing committees. Building and Housing, Mrs. Blankfeld.
I think Law Director McConville covered it adequately. We continue to explore this issue, and we will meet again, as he mentioned, when we have dates that work with John Carroll's counsel, Ms. Trammell, and Kate Malone. So that will be coming up. And thanks again to Mr. Cook for promoting our city's continued participation in the 2020 census. We'd love to have that tree in our city and not in Cleveland Heights. That's all I have this evening, Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mrs. Blankfeld. Next is Community Outreach, Mrs. Pardee.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a little follow-up on the status of the RFP through the Tech Advisory Commission or with their help. I know that the chair has met with Rachel Mullen, who is charged with drafting it. So they are working on that, and he expects to have an update for all of us within the next week or so. So it's moving. Thank you.
Yes, very good. Thank you. Next then is Economic Development, Mr. Rock.
No report, Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rock. Next then is Finance, Mrs. Weiss.
Thank you, Mayor. As the Finance Director mentioned, there will be a second revised budget probably within the month. So we will probably have to either have a Finance Committee meeting or a Council of the Whole meeting. And that's all. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mrs. Weiss. Next up is Recreation, Mr. Erdl. Okay, no report, I think. Thank you, Mr. Erdl. Next,
No.
I'm sorry? Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. Erdl. Next then is Safety, Mrs. Berry.
I had to unmute myself. The last couple of weeks have been a little emotional for me because of all the civil unrest that has been going on. And actually, the first time the mayor called me up, it was hard for me to even talk about it because it took me back to coming up in the 60s. But since then, other councilwomen, Black councilwomen, have reached out, and we have had some Zoom meetings over some of this racism and civil unrest. And we put together a letter that is going out to Ohio State Senate, the Ohio House of Representatives, United States Senate, United States House of Representatives, and we also sent it out to just about every legislator in the state of Ohio. There was about 25 of Black councilwomen that signed this letter. And I was actually planning to read the letter to you, but since it's going on 9:45, I'm not going to do that to you. But some of the main points in the letter, and I'm going to just start with this paragraph. Accordingly, in our role as councilwomen elected to serve in local governments across the state of Ohio, and women who are spouses, wives, mothers, daughters, grandmothers, sisters, as well as political leaders, we seek to create a set of measures as well as intentional civil rights and social justice policies designed to ensure that our communities have the same equal protection under the law that is extended to other groups. Therefore, we support and call for accountability and equitable practices in the following 8 points: policy provisions regarding racial justice. Point 1, declare racism a public health crisis. Number 2, remove discriminative laws such as the Stop and Identify statute. Number 3, expand statewide medical provisions to include mental health care regarding race, i.e. counseling and therapy sessions. Number 4, implement a financial penalty assessment for false calls regarding racial profiling, as well as an abusive and unnecessary use of local police agency resources. Number 5, conduct additional employment equity trainings by certified professionals within each respective field, inclusive of racial justice, unconscious bias, mental health, de-escalation practices, and drug addiction awareness. Number 6, require an annual accountability analysis of police departments in regard to excessive use of force complaints and make reporting complaints process available electronically and anonymous with a follow-up loop. Number 7, implement a decertification process for officers found to have engaged in egregious actions and behaviors similar to the law, medical and social work professions. Number 8, mandate body-worn cameras at all times, which will which can be incentivized by the United States Justice Department. It is critical that elected legislators at every level of government band together to make the urgent and necessary actions needed to address historic discrimination and protect as well as support our Black citizenry. For we are stronger and more effective as a collective. We are the answer, and we possess the power to turn the tide towards justice by launching into productive action and thereby ensuring Ohio stays safe. We thank each and every elected colleague for your leadership in your respective offices and look forward to working collaboratively to provide educational opportunities and further support our police officers who protect and serve without bias, as well as making racial justice a priority issue and passing comprehensive racial justice policies which will improve the condition of Black lives starting in Ohio and expanding throughout the United States. My hope is that we can start this in the next week or two to have a committee that represents different people within the city of University Heights, and that we come together and talk and try to come together to be an example to the world. I think we have started with our ordinance at the last council meeting, but we still need to come together. I feel that we need to learn how to love one another, understand one another, and work together as citizens within the city of University Heights and let it go on further outside of this city. That is my prayer and my request, and I hope you all will join in this movement.
Wonderful.
And you see, I'm a deacon, so I was getting ready to go into a prayer, but I won't do that to you today.
All right.
So this letter is available for all of you to read the letter in entirety. I didn't read the entire letter. I just tried to read the major points.
And very good. Thank you, Mrs. Berry. Yeah, the 8 points in particular, I think, are the the letter is of course important in its entirety, but the 8 points I think are the things that we're gonna want to focus on, especially to address and deliberate over those things. And I'm looking forward to working with you on the ad hoc advisory council that we're creating for our review of our use of force policies as well.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Next up then is Service and Utilities, Mr. Gould.
Mayor, only to report that, since we last had some consensus with the administration and with council around future actions on the solid waste study, it was determined that it would be best to hold hearings at a later time and not take immediate action on the report, given all the change and adjustment and changes to services and amenities within the city at this time. So I intend to circle back with members of council, perhaps after the summer break, to begin scheduling those sessions to determine what action, if any, will be taken.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. Gould. And then that leaves Committee of the Whole, Mrs. Weiss.
No report, Mayor.
Okay, very good. We're now at the end of our regular agenda. We do have a motion to go into executive session, given the late hour. I'm sure that we can keep it brief. And I don't anticipate that there'll be any business that we conduct when we exit the executive session other than a motion to adjourn. The members of the public are nevertheless welcome to stick around and see that. I would never tell you that you ought not, but I don't expect that you'll see much other than us come back quickly and then wind down the meeting and get on with our evening. So with that said, Mr. Gould, will you be moving us over into the other room for the executive session? That should be all members.
Mayor, I have all of the members of council as well as the law director. Are there any other members of your staff that you'd like to be present?
I don't know that we need anything. Dennis, did you need to join us for that? I don't know that you do.
Okay,
Okay, no, I think with just the law director, we'll be fine. Yeah.
wonderful. Will be transferred over now.
All right, very good. Thank you.
Oh, well done. Well done.
You did that. I did.
Oh, that was great. That was the best thing all night.
Mayor, make a motion to exit executive session.
We have a motion to exit executive session by Mr. Gould. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Commander Blankfeld.
Play that one more time, though.
All right. Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll?
Mrs. Blankfeld,
Aye.
Mrs. Berry,
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee,
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss.
Aye.
Mr. Erdl,
Aye.
Mr. Rock,
Aye.
Mr. Gould.
Aye.
All right. We are back into regular session. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So move, Mayor.
Very good. Motion by Mr. Rock. Second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Erdl. Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll?
Mrs. Blankfeld,
Aye.
Mrs. Berry,
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee,
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss,
Aye.
Mr. Erdl,
Aye.
Rock,
Aye.
Mr. Gould.
Aye.
Okay. Good night, everyone. May the force be
Good
with you.
night.
Good night. I just mixed up my movies. We're adjourned.